Most brides worry about rain on their wedding day, but I watched my parents walk into my reception wearing head-to-toe black as if they were burying me. 150 guests turned their heads, and the whispering started before my mother even reached the microphone. She didn't wait for an invitation. She walked straight up to the stage, took the mic from our disc jockey's hand, and looked right at me. "We are mourning the daughter we lost," she announced, and her voice didn't tremble. It was a cold, sharp blade. She told the room I was dead to the family unless I signed a legal waiver, renouncing my financial stake in the family estate, a stake worth $170,000, effectively gifting the property's equity to my sister, Kayla, right then and there. Welcome to Turning Tables Stories channel. I'm currently enjoying a quiet cup of coffee, watching the view outside and reflecting on how quickly a peaceful moment can shatter. This story's heavy atmosphere makes me cherish this stillness even more. Before we dive deeper, where are you watching from today, and what is your favorite drink right now? Let's head back 18 months to see how this started. To understand how my mother could stand in a room full of people and try to rob me at my own wedding, you have to go back 18 months. I grew up in Charleston, South Carolina. My parents, Angela and Thomas, lived for the image of old money and high society, even when the bank accounts were screaming otherwise. In our house, there were two daughters. Kayla was the golden child. She was the socialite, the one who looked perfect in every photo on the mantle. I was Madison, the reliable one, the one who got the doctorate in heritage preservation and actually worked. Kayla's achievements were celebrated like national holidays, while mine were treated as chores I was expected to finish. If I landed a massive contract or finished a complex restoration, my mother would just nod and ask when I was going to help Kayla with her latest crisis. Then came the call that changed the terms of our relationship. The family estate, a historic mansion that was the center of their social identity, was literally rotting from the inside out. The roof was failing, the foundation was shifting, and my parents were broke. They had spent their lives maintaining a facade they couldn't afford. We had a meeting in the formal dining room. Kayla wasn't there, of course. She texted the group chat an hour before, saying she was too stressed to deal with house talk. So, it was just me. I sat across from them as they described the $170,000 needed to save the property. I looked at their desperate faces and felt that familiar, heavy pulling in my chest. It was the survivor's chain. I realize now that I wasn't just paying for a roof. I was trying to buy a seat at the table. I was trying to purchase the love and recognition they had withheld for 29 years. I thought if I saved the one thing they valued most, they would finally see me. I spent 10 years of double shifts and brutal budgeting to save that money, and I handed over a cashier's check for $170,000 an investment. Jackson insisted we document as a secured loan for the restoration. Every cent I had. My mother hugged me and whispered that when they were gone, the house would be mine. It was a handshake between blood, but I didn't know then that for my family, blood wasn't a bond. It was just a way to identify a target. I coordinated the contractors, lived on black coffee, and watched that house transform back into a masterpiece. I did the work while Kayla was out spending her marketing salary on designer shoes. I was the silent investor in their version of a happy family. But the problem with being a silent investor is that, eventually, they forget you own a stake in the business at all. Jackson, my husband, was the only one who saw the toll it took. He's an architect, and he knows that if a foundation isn't solid, the whole structure is a lie. He warned me that my family's gratitude had an expiration date. I didn't want to believe him. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a balance sheet, and I was about to find out just how deep the deficit really went. I returned to the Charleston estate 6 months after the renovation was finally finished. I had spent that time on a high-stakes project in Virginia, but I still carried the key to the front door like a piece of my own soul. I expected to feel a sense of homecoming, but instead, I walked into a house that had been repossessed by ghosts. I went to my old bedroom to fetch some research journals, and the door swung open to reveal a color that made my stomach turn. Lavender, Kayla's favorite, cloying shade of purple. My walls were gone, my books were gone, and the vintage mahogany desk I'd restored myself had been replaced by a white vanity mirror with blinding lights. "Madison, you're back," my mother said, sitting in the sunroom, scrolling through a digital catalog. She didn't even look up. "We moved your things to the garage. Kayla needs a proper suite when she visits from the city. She's under so much pressure at the marketing firm, she needs a sanctuary." I didn't say a word. I walked to the garage, and my entire history was shoved into two translucent plastic bins sitting on the oil-stained concrete. My grandmother's handmade quilt, my graduation tassel, my first camera, all of it discarded like clutter. "What about our agreement?" I asked, standing in the kitchen doorway. My voice was calm, but it was the calm of a storm that had already passed. "The roof, the foundation, the $170,000 I handed over. You said the house was mine." My father, Thomas, appeared in the hallway. He didn't look at me. He looked at his coffee mug. "Don't be pushy, Madison," he said. "We're grateful, of course, but circumstances change. Kayla is struggling. She doesn't have your professional stability. We have to think about the family as a whole." Pushy. That was the tax they charged for asking them to keep their word. I realized in that moment that I was witnessing the trap of normalizing cruelty. When you are the one who always provides, the one who always fixes the leaks and pays the debts, your sacrifice becomes invisible. It stops being a choice and becomes an expectation. My parents didn't feel like they were robbing me because, in their minds, everything I had belonged to them anyway. I was a subscription service they had forgotten they weren't paying for. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years, and now the account was empty. "We'll discuss the deed later," my mother added, her voice cloying and dismissive. "Right now, we need to focus on Kayla's engagement party. Don't make things awkward with your father." I looked at them, two people living in a monument to my hard work, and felt a sudden, freezing clarity. This wasn't a family home, it was a crime scene. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I simply turned and walked back to my car. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. It was time to stop being the silent investor in my own destruction. Jackson was waiting for me when I got back to our apartment. He didn't need to ask if it had gone badly. One look at the way I was gripping my keys was enough. He didn't offer me a shoulder to cry on because he knew I had run out of tears years ago. Instead, he handed me a glass of water and sat me down at the kitchen table. "Tell me the numbers, Madison," he said. That was Jackson. He didn't speak in platitudes, he spoke in structures. He knew that for people like my parents, emotions were just things they could manipulate. But facts were immovable. I told him everything. I told him about the lavender walls that felt like a burial shroud for my childhood. I told him about the $170,000 being rebranded as a voluntary gift. I told him about the plastic bins in the garage. Jackson's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained clear. "You've been the unacknowledged pillar holding up their version of family for too long," he said. "Now it's time to settle the accounts. This isn't revenge, it's accounting." Starting that night, our relationship shifted into a different kind of partnership. It was precise. Jackson spent hours on his laptop every evening, reaching out to a real estate attorney he knew in the city. He didn't ask for a favor, he asked for a strategy. If you contributed a significant amount to the property, documented and traceable, and they tried to deny you any interest, you have a strong case for unjust enrichment, he explained to me one night. He said it with the same factual tone he used when discussing load-bearing walls. I began my own audit. I pulled every bank statement from the last 2 years and highlighted the $170,000 wire transfer. I gathered every email exchange I'd had with the contractors, every invoice for the period-accurate masonry, and every work order for the structural stabilization. I took screenshots of every text from my mother, promising me the house was my legacy. "They aren't shocked by what they've done," Jackson noted as he organized the files into a digital folder. "They're just shocked that you've stopped playing along." 1 week before the ceremony, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Jackson walked into the living room holding a small, black USB drive. He held it up like a trophy. "I told your mother I'd handle the photo reel for the reception," he said with a small, dangerous smile. "She was thrilled. She thinks it's going to be a tribute to Kayla and the Mosley name." I looked at that drive and felt a surge of cold power. Inside my laptop, my world was no longer made of childhood memories and desperate hopes for approval. It was made of numbers, facts, and quiet retribution. "Let them have their audience," Jackson murmured. "We're going to make sure that when the lights go down, the truth is the only thing left standing." I went back to my work, finishing the logistics for a heritage site in Georgia. I didn't answer a single call from my parents. I didn't respond to Kayla's passive-aggressive texts about the seating chart. I was no longer Madison, the invisible daughter. I was the architect of a reckoning they would never see coming. I stopped looking for excuses for my parents and started looking for the missing inventory. I had spent $170,000 to preserve the structure of that mansion, but someone was systematically gutting its soul. It started when I noticed the vacant space on the dining room sideboard. A pair of silver monogrammed candlesticks that had belonged to my great-grandmother, Eleanor, were gone. I remembered polishing them when I was 10, the one chore my mother actually let me do because it kept me out of Kayla's way. I didn't ask my mother where they were. I knew the answer would be a lie. Instead, I used my professional network in the Heritage Conservation Circle, and I contacted a high-end estate appraiser in Charleston. Within 24 hours, he sent me a link to a private auction site. The candlesticks were their starting bid, $5,000. But they weren't alone. I scrolled through the listings and felt my blood turn to ice. A set of hand-carved mahogany side tables, an original landscape painting from the 1800s, a collection of vintage Charleston lace, all of it belonged to the estate. All of it was part of the heritage. I had just nearly bankrupted myself to save. Then I saw the seller's profile. It was an account under the name TK Market, and the contact information was linked to a man named Travis Keene. I remembered the FaceTime conversation I'd overheard in the garage, Kayla laughing with a man about her parents being gullible and about her plan to list the house for $2.5 million the moment the deed was in her name. This Travis was the secret boyfriend my parents didn't even know existed. Kayla had convinced my parents that the antiques were being sent away for professional cleaning to match the house's new restoration. Instead, she was liquidating our family history to fund a life with a man she was hiding from the very people she was robbing. I didn't reach for my phone to call her, and I didn't storm over to the mansion to demand my money back. Anger wasn't loud this time, it was clinical. I was the ghost benefactor, and I had just discovered my partners were embezzling from the firm. I took screenshots of every listing and matched them against the before photos I had taken during the structural audit of the renovation. I had documented every inch of that house to ensure the restoration was period accurate, and I had a digital ledger of every asset they were trying to steal. I sent the files to Jackson. He didn't say a word when he saw them. He just opened the wedding slideshow folder on his laptop. I watched him create a new subfolder, and he titled it Evidence of Asset Liquidation. "This isn't a family drama anymore," Jackson said, his voice flat and lethal. "This is a heist, and Kayla is the lead." I sat at the table and opened my own spreadsheet. I added a new column for estimated value of stolen heritage, and the total exceeded $90,000. They had used my money to fix the vault so they could empty it in peace. I looked at the black USB drive sitting on the counter. It was no longer just a backup for a wedding reel. It was a verdict. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel the weight of betrayal. I felt the sharp, freezing clarity of an auditor who had found a massive discrepancy. "They wanted a drama-free wedding," I whispered to the empty kitchen, "but they're getting a reckoning instead." I dragged the auction screenshots into the drive. Click, save, complete. I was done being the daughter who provided. I was now the daughter who documented. And in Charleston, your reputation is the only thing the bank won't let you borrow against. I was about to make sure their credit was permanently revoked. I looked at the pen my sister had placed in front of me, but I didn't touch it. I didn't cry. 150 pairs of eyes were locked onto the bride in white, waiting for a verdict. My sister, Kayla, leaned in close, and the scent of her expensive perfume, clashing with the salt air of Charleston, was suffocating. "Just sign it," she whispered, her voice a low, confident purr. "It was never yours anyway." Behind her, my mother held the microphone like a gavel, and her black mourning dress was a dark stain on my wedding day. My father stood beside her, his eyes empty, a silent wall of endorsement for the theft they were attempting to finalize in public. Jackson stood up from beside me. He didn't rush. He buttoned his suit jacket, one button, and gave me a small, steady nod. He walked away from the table, past the dance floor, and headed toward the disc jockey booth. He picked up a small black remote. The projector screen, which had been cycling through soft focus engagement photos, went dark for exactly 1 second. Then it lit up with a different kind of history. The first image wasn't a photo of us. It was a digital copy of my bank statement, a wire transfer of $170,000, highlighted in yellow. The memo line, printed in sharp black letters, read, "Heritage Mansion Structural Restoration." A murmur rippled through the wooden farm tables. Jackson pressed the remote again. The next slide showed 8 months of invoices from Greg Holloway, listing the new roof, the foundation piers, and the period-accurate plumbing. The total was $170,247, marked "Paid in Full by Madison." I watched my mother's hand slowly lower the microphone. Kayla's smile didn't just fade, it vanished like a bulb on a dead circuit. But Jackson was only getting started. He clicked the remote again, and the screen displayed the screenshots I'd found of the private auction site. There, they were great-grandmother Eleanor's silver candlesticks and the hand-carved mahogany side tables listed for sale by an account linked to Travis Keene. Then came the finisher. Blown up to 6 feet wide was the iMessage conversation between Kayla and her secret boyfriend. 150 people read it in a silence so thick it pressed against my eardrums. Kayla's message in blue read, "Mom and Dad are so gullible. I told them Jackson is only with Madison for the house. They bought it immediately." The next message was even worse. "Madison is an idiot for pouring $170,000 into a house she'll never own. Travis and I checked the comps. We list it for $2.5 million the second I get the deed." Watching their faces, I saw the exact moment my family's social armor shattered. In Charleston, your status is a structure built on the perception of wealth and integrity. My parents had spent decades pretending they were the keepers of a grand legacy, but the screen had just revealed the truth. Their position was a hollow shell, rented by my money and sustained by my silence. Without my $170,000, they weren't the elite of the city. They were just aging accomplices in their youngest daughter's heist. Jackson turned away from the screen and looked at my family. His voice was calm, factual, and lethal. "That's who told you your daughter's husband was a gold digger, your other daughter." The room didn't gasp. It roared with the sound of 150 people processing a betrayal in real time. Kayla snatched her designer bag, clutching it to her chest like a shield, and bolted for the exit. My mother stood frozen at the stage, the microphone dropping from her hand and hitting the floor with a thud that echoed through the speakers. My father didn't say a word. He took my mother's elbow and steered her toward the door. 3 black silhouettes disappeared into the Charleston night as an engine started and headlights swept across the barn windows. Jackson walked back to our table and sat down. He took my hand under the tablecloth. "Sorry about the delay," he told the room. "The bar is still open." The silence that followed their departure lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then, the room erupted in a different kind of noise. Not a gasp, but the thunderous applause of 150 people who had just seen a shadow lifted. Jackson sat down beside me, squeezed my hand, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a silent investor in someone else's version of a happy family. The next morning, we didn't go on a honeymoon. We went to the law offices of Mitchell Farrow. I didn't want the mansion anymore. The lavender walls and the plastic bins in the garage had poisoned any sense of home that was left. I wanted my $170,000 back, and I wanted it in a way that left no room for voluntary gifts. The civil claim for unjust enrichment was undeniable. We had the bank statements, the invoices, and now the digital evidence of a planned theft witnessed by every prominent family in Charleston. Faced with the threat of a public fraud trial, my parents had no choice but to sign a settlement agreement. They were bound to pay back the full $170,000 over 36 months in equal installments. To secure the debt, my lawyer placed a lien on the property until the balance was paid in full. The consequences in our social circle were swift and absolute. My mother, the woman who lived for the social scoreboard of the church committee, stopped attending services for 2 months. When she finally returned, the front pew sat empty. She slipped in through the side entrance and sat in the very last row, alone. In a city where reputation is the only currency that matters, they were officially bankrupt. Kayla's downfall was even more clinical. Travis Keene, the man who was supposed to split the $2.5 million payday from listing the house, vanished the moment the legal lien hit the property. He blocked her on every platform, phone, Instagram, Facebook, all of it. Kayla moved away to the city by the end of July, leaving without a goodbye dinner or a single word to our parents. My mother was left in a renovated house she couldn't afford to keep, realizing that the golden child she'd sacrificed her integrity for was only ever there for the upside. Jackson and I found our own legacy. In September, we bought a 2-bedroom fixer-upper on the county line. It had an overgrown yard and a porch that needed work, but this time, our names were on the deed in permanent ink. I planted a vegetable garden along the south fence, tomatoes, peppers, and herbs, something alive and growing that was purely ours. I've come to understand that this was the real justice of the sower. I stopped trying to water a dead garden and started planting my own seeds. I realized that family isn't determined by bloodlines, but by the courage to choose the people who actually see you. I'm Madison. I'm 29, and for the first time in my life, I'm the one holding the key. There are still nights when I lie awake and see it, my mother at the microphone, my sister's sharp smile, the pen on the table, and 150 faces watching me at the lowest moment of my life. Those images don't go away, and I don't think they're supposed to. They aren't wounds anymore. They are the scar tissue that reminds me exactly where my limit is. I don't hate my parents. Hate takes energy. I'd rather spend on something that grows. What I do hate is the version of myself who thought blood was enough. The girl who relied on private records and informal spreadsheets instead of forcing my own parents to sign a formal, notarized loan agreement the moment I handed over that check. The girl who thought love and trust were the same thing. They are not. Love is a feeling, but trust is a contract, and every contract needs terms. If you are watching this and you're in a family where your love is measured by how much you're willing to give up, I want you to know something. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to love someone and still say no. You are allowed to care about your parents and still protect yourself. You are allowed to walk away from a table where you are only welcome when you are serving. Setting a boundary isn't betrayal, it isn't selfishness, and it isn't being ungrateful. You know what is? Sitting in silence while the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones doing the damage. That is the real betrayal, and it's the one you are committing against yourself. I'm writing this as a letter to anyone who has ever felt like they were living on the edge of their own family circle. To the ones who have been the useful child rather than the loved one, please realize that your value is not a currency for others to spend. You don't need to shout to be heard, you just need to stand still and let the truth do the talking. Every morning, I walk through my own front door, a door I helped pay for, attached to a house with my name on the deed. Boundaries are not walls, they are doors. You just get to choose who walks through. And for the first time in my life, I am the one holding the key. Don't let your kindness become a weapon for someone else to use against you. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs the strength to stand up for themselves today. Don't forget to hit subscribe so we can keep building this community of justice together. Thank you for being here with me.